my brother Paul, my brother Paul was having problems, and I said to him, you know, you need to get help. I'm too close to you. And so he went to a counsellor, and the counsellor did tapping. And he finished with the counsellor. He didn't want to pay her any more money. He couldn't afford it. And he said, what am I going to do? So he Googled in tapping, or depression actually. He Googled in depression, that was what he did. And Robert came up, and Paul started telling me about this FasterEFT and Robert Smith, and he started using it. I mean, I was talking about it, but I wasn't doing it. Paul was using it. And then he could see the changes in himself. He could, you know, he felt some changes. And then his son Matthew was diagnosed with chronic dyslexia. And there was some kind of figure thrown about that he was 95% dyslexic. He couldn't do anything, and there was no hope for him. And so, because of that, Paul said, I'm going to ring Robert Smith. I'm going to call Robert Smith, and so that's what he did. And it was interesting to me that he could help his son, but he couldn't help himself, because I know a lot of his stuff, and anyway. So they made the call, and Robert said, ask Matthew. Matthew is 9, I think, 8 or 9, and ask him why he doesn't want to go to school. And I remember, you know, Tracy saying, my sister-in-law saying, how would you find 100 ways of why you don't want to go to school? But because they were desperate enough, they did what they were told. And they asked the child, and the child gave them 100 reasons in 20 minutes. You know, he didn't like putting on his socks, he didn't like putting on his shoes, because he knew when he was putting on his shoes he had to go to school. And the whole ritual of getting ready to go to school was all the reasons that he didn't want to go. So they got their list, and they went up on a Sunday afternoon up to the shop, and it was a big, big thing, I remember it. And because they were, you know, Paul, my brother, was very emotional, and you know, you're putting your child, you're risking some guy over on the other side of the world, and you've never met him, and you know, your child is your most precious thing. So anyway, they went through it, thank God, and Tracy was in the office with Matthew, and they had the phone on hands-free, and the child was sitting there, and Tracy was doing what Robert was, she was tapping, and Paul was outside the office, totally traumatised. He couldn't cope with it at all, because, oh, I'm tapping now, this wee, gorgeous wee boy in such pain. But anyway, they did it, and I remember Tracy telling me she was apologising to Robert because, you know, it wasn't working, because Matthew was resisting it. You know, he didn't want to do it, and Robert said, keep going, he's taking care of himself. This has been protecting him all this time, so he is, don't worry about it. So they persisted, and eventually Matthew broke, and they got through, and this is how Tracy described it to me. And then Matthew was exhausted. They took him home, and he just slept. And but the next day he wanted to go to school, you know, and that week it just got better and better, and he was, you know, getting ready to go to school, and he was fine, and he was going to school. So over the weeks and months then, Matthew started getting better and better and better. And this is a guy, they said he was 95% dyslexic, that he couldn't do anything. And he wasn't going to be able, you know, this was a life sentence. You know, and I remember feeling, you know, the pain of my brother. My brother is slightly dyslexic, and I know, you know my stuff, it's all out of the same house. And the helplessness that he felt because his child was going to have to go through the rest of his life with this sentence. And so then the changes started coming, and Matthew started getting better and better and better. And one of the things that I remember was when Paul noticed it when Matthew wrote his name on the snow, and Paul said you could hold a mirror up to it. It was completely the opposite way around. So that's just the way. But in Robert's world, he's doing it perfectly. Whatever way he's doing it perfectly for him. So anyway, then Matthew was tapping in school, and he was just, this wee guy's telling me, I tap, and I thought, I better find out more about this. So then Matthew's life has improved a lot. One of the things one of the side effects was that Matthew wouldn't go out to play. He couldn't go out to play because he had such problems. And this was one of the places that they noticed the change, that Matthew, as soon as he got in from school, he was up and out to play with the children outside. So the impact it was huge, Then we couldn't believe it then when Paul said, he'd love to go and see Robert Smith. And I said, well, why don't you go? But he just couldn't give himself permission to, he couldn't go to America. And then one day he came into the shop and he said to me, you're not going to believe it. He said, Robert Smith's coming to England. And I said, you're kidding? I said, well, get organised, go over, I'll stay here, I'll mind the shop, you go and do it. And then a couple of days later he came in, he said, you're not going to believe this. He said, Robert Smith's coming to Ireland. And I said, that's flipping brilliant. I said, God's working in mysterious ways here. He's bringing Robert Smith to us. It was incredible. And so then they decided they would pack up the car, and it's a big journey for us. It's 300 miles from the top of Ireland to the bottom of Ireland, but we don't have motorways, the way, well, we're getting them, but we don't, it's a long journey, and it's a big journey. And so it was a big mental shift as well as a physical shift for these four to get into the car and go to Cork. And there they met Robert, and they all had a session, and Tracy was the one she was the caretaker, so she was taking care of everybody else. But Robert spotted her immediately and pulled her in first, and you should hear her telling the story. It was unbelievable. She said there was no way that she was, going to do it. And Robert just said, right, you're first. And she thought, oh God. So Paul is holding on to the two children, and he is walking up and down outside, his wife is in the hotel room with this man getting tapped on, and he's walking up and down the corridor tapping, dragging these two children, and they're looking at him and going, what is going on? And Tracy said she just didn't know what hit her. She absolutely did not know what hit her. And Tracy's very glamorous and very beautiful and very well manicured and takes care of herself. And she said she came out of the room and her mascara was down here, and she thought, and she took and Robert just went, right, Paul, you're next. So Paul's standing, then suddenly Tracy was standing with two children and looking at them, and she went down and she said to the children, I'll take them to the swimming pool. But she had nothing. She had nothing to put them into in the swimming pool. So she went into the shop in the hotel and she said, could I have two swimsuits for these children? And they had no children's swimsuits. They only had adult swimsuits, and she bought 2 adult swimsuits. And she said suddenly the children were in the swimming pool in a swimsuit that would fit me, my size 12. And the wee one, Annie, was sitting in a swimming pool with a size 12 swimsuit on her, thinking, what is going on? So then it was all over very quickly, and Paul, he staggers out after being with Robert, doesn't know what hit him. And the two children, and suddenly they're up under the arm and still in the swimsuit, get swimsuits up, back into the clothes, and they go in and Robert taps on them. And then suddenly it was time for the seminar, and Tracy said she didn't even have time to get changed. She introduced Robert. She said, I was standing with the mascara. And she said, something, she couldn't have cared less. She said she doesn't do that kind of thing. And she just said it just didn't bother her. And she didn't know why it didn't bother her, but it didn't bother her. And so you can imagine I'm up in the north getting parts of this relayed to me and thinking, oh, why am I not there? I want to be there. But I had my responsibilities in the shop. So then I thought, well, I'll just phone Robert and see if I can do a phone session or something. So then he said, well, I could come up, and I went, oh my God, no, and I was resisting it. I didn't. Anyway, that long story short, Robert came up, and I had the seminar and everything else. But I am Paul and Tracy and Matthew and Annie come back from Cork, and I'm round to the house to see, well, what do they look like? Do they look any different? What happened? Whatever. And Paul and Tracy are in the room, and Matthew and Annie, and I said to Matthew and Annie, well, what did you do? Did you meet Robert? Yes. Did you tap? Yes. Matthew showing me how he taps. And I said, did you tell him your wee problems? And Annie she's so beautiful. And I said, did you tell Robert your wee problems? Yes. And I said, what are they? And she just went like this here, and she looked at me. And Paul and Tracy were standing behind her. So she just pointed to the two parents. And just smiled. And then she just went out of the room, and Paul and Tracy just went. And they just stood looking at each other. You know? And it was like, you could just see it drop, you could just see it all clear, and them just saying, you know, it's us that's doing it. It's absolutely us that's doing it to the children, you know. So, and then I had the seminar, and God, my family were queuing up, lining up. You don't say queue, and they all came to the seminar, and Tracy brought their other daughter, Jennifer, and Robert tapped on her. So I set up a room in my house, and they lined up, and everybody came, and they all lived happily ever after.